Hello, it's Joyful Hermit again. And some of you may wonder, why would I continue on with the negative things that had happened? Um, why would I keep going back, even after various injuries or um, when things that I would try to do, and there were many, many others in other parishes, such as even the soup kitchen, and when that priest for the weekend masses at every homily, he derided me publicly, used my whole name, and friends called. This was in another town, and they said, "Oh, don't let your son go to Mass this weekend. It's terrible what is being said about you from the pulpit." And a man that I had grown up with his children next door when I was Protestant, they were Catholic, he had said in all of his 84 years he had never heard the like of that coming from the pulpit. Why do I keep going back? The many things that I tried to do and that the Lord allowed me to do, such as writing a large grant that they were awarded, and then a different priest said I would not be allowed to help implement it. And of course they didn't implement it properly, and it failed, and it lost them graces of the community from an organization that said they would never be allowed, never give any more grants ever to them again. And why would I persist? Why would I? It's the process. It's the process. And it all has to do with love. Why could I even now say how much I love the priests? Why would I stay there in the one parish and help the young priest? And even after he went for treatment, and that was sort of bogus, even the treatment place, he would call me from there, and that's the world, that's life. Things don't always, or not often, work out as we think they ought to. Why would I keep befriending him? It's out of love. Love to suffer and suffer to love. So, however, there comes times then when we start to see a shift. It's a matter of metamorphoses over and over and over, and sometimes the species gradually changes, evolves. And I'm at one of those points now of evolving. Now I can't see that I will ever go back, but it's all right. I'm not saying I'm not Catholic. I don't have rancor against anyone. And I want to talk now about something I was shown and explained to me. It will be 4 years this August. And these things take time for the human mind and the spirit to understand in greater depth, and I probably still don't understand the full ramifications, but I'm more willing to accept at a very deeper level, to let go of what was shown to me as the temporal Catholic world and the mystical Catholic world. And yes, it is all one reality, but there are nuances of differences. I was shown in a dream, another one of those lucid, vivid ones, that I was swimming in a lake, and I had swam out from shore and was in a part that was very, very deep. I could no longer see the bottom. It was a deep hole in the lake. And beyond, it wasn't quite so deep, but went on and on out into the deep. And in this part, there were nets just beneath the surface, large, thick roped nets. And in those nets, many people were tangled and trapped under the water. And I stopped swimming and stopped at those nets and wanted to try to help free the people from the nets. And I was told at that point, no, they will be all right in those nets. Leave them where they are. Keep swimming. Do not get tangled yourself in those nets, but keep swimming out into the deep, out into the mystical Catholic world. And I was shown that that was the temporal Catholic world, and that those people would be all right. I was told they will be all right where they are. Do not be concerned. Just keep swimming out into the deep. And I woke up, and more was explained to me. And since that time, there were some who didn't like the sound of temporal Catholic world and mystical Catholic world. And there's nothing wrong with the temporal Catholic world, anything more than there's anything wrong with the mystical Catholic world. It's one reality, but there are differences. And there are negative aspects to the temporal Catholic world, just as there are negative aspects to the mystical Catholic world. The mystical Catholic world contains the element of the devil and the demons, the dark angels, the dark forces, as well as the good angels and the light, and Christ the light. The mystical Catholic world is what we will experience all through eternity. The temporal is passing away. The temporal Catholic world has its most necessary and good aspects to it. The temporal aspect of the church, what St. Bernard called the visible church, and he called the mystical Catholic world the interior church. And other saints and mystics have had other terms for it, for the mystical Catholic world and the temporal Catholic world. I use those phrases because that is what I was told, and it made sense to me. If it does not to you, that is all right. Perhaps some of the other phrases make better sense. And I think some immediately thought negative when they thought of the temporal Catholic world. It's not all negative, any more than the mystical Catholic world is all negative. So it is a truth and a reality that the bulk of our existence is going to be spent in the mystical, not in the temporal. The psalmist says, the temporal is passing away. 1,000 years is the equivalent to one day. The timelessness of the mystical far exceeds that of the limited time of the temporal. But the temporal is very, very critical. It's where we learn the process of growing and of the metamorphoses into greater and higher levels, out more into the deep, cast out into the depths. So that is where the temporal Catholic world and the mystical Catholic world got the terminology in my life, and yet it has taken me now nearly 4 years to grasp even more and to let go more of the temporal that I still was clinging to. And of course, while we're in our physical forms, we're never going to be out of the temporal totally. And even when we are deceased and in the mystical, we will still have opportunity to interface with the temporal. And I've had many experiences myself of that, of those who have gone on, who have broken through into the temporal again to give me messages and to show me things and to teach me. My mother and father have, relatives have, my grandmother, even before I was Catholic, appeared to me 2 different times at least, with messages and in appearance corporeal. And I anticipate that I will be doing that for those that His real presence desires me to interface with when I am no longer a temporal presence on this earth, but that I will interface and from the mystical into the temporal. And you will too. So that's a little more explanation of the temporal and the mystical. And um, to be assured that it's not a neglect, and in some cases, when the Lord chooses for us to swim on, He assures us that those that we may mistakenly think, oh, they're in trouble, we need to help them get out from the nets. No, they're all right there. That is part of the process that they must go through in their lives. And that can be exemplified even in my own sharing of, for example, working so hard to get the Padre Pio prayer group going, or um, writing the grant, and still hoping and praying that they would implement it according to what was stipulated, but having no control over it. My part in it was over, and I had to learn the love of great personal suffering to see how they did themselves in the community. It was sad, but it was necessary, partly for my lesson to let go, and partly for their lesson, perhaps, in some ways. I recall a woman coming to me. She brought me a little something her husband had made, and she wanted to tell me, I think very well intentioned, what a lot of the older women were saying about me in that town, in my hometown, you know. They were saying that I was crazy, and I guess crazy was, and weird. And it was after I'd been sort of cast out of the soup kitchen. And she said, oh, I tell them, well, maybe she thinks we're crazy or weird. And I assured her, no, I don't at all. I try not to think in those terms of others. Last night, a dear woman was thoughtful when she was at the grocery and called me and said, did I need anything? Well, yes, I asked her to bring some Greek yogurt. So I use that as a meal often. It's very high in protein and good in calcium. And the name of another woman came up as I said, oh, this other woman had called, and how thoughtful that was of her also. But this other woman said, oh, well, a saint wouldn't do the things that she says or how she acts. And I said, oh, this other woman, I'm pretty assured she has a closed head injury from childhood. And yes, she does say things in a way that the people at the cathedral, a little bit, sometimes a little bit like that we get. Um, this woman is very authentic in her way. She's had a very rough life. And she says things sometimes that are a little bit bizarre. But yes, she's just as much a saint, or will be, than any of us. But see how easily the judging gets going. And I said, well, she loves the Lord, and she's very good for the cathedral. She stirs up the mix a little bit. She's very authentic. See, here was this other woman already. Oh, well, a saint wouldn't say those things, or wouldn't. Well, I said, saints say lots of things. And one thing, I've never been too thrilled about that among my fellow Catholics as to who would be a saint and who wouldn't be a saint. I think there's too much caught up in all of that. And then the judging comes based on it. There's one priest who has some other difficulties in his life. One morning after the early Mass, he could be heard quite loudly telling the sacristan about me. I will never give her communion. The saints wouldn't ever do anything like that at Mass, referring to my state that I was having, that I couldn't help. And I thought, I'm not wanting to be saint. I don't, all of that. I don't care. That's up to God. And I just want to endure and get through this life, this life of sufferings and of joys. And all of that doesn't weigh heavily in my mind whatsoever, and I don't try to go around thinking, well, who would be a saint and who isn't going to be a saint. It doesn't make sense. It's not necessary. Well, God bless His real presence in you.